Hello guys, when back in 2022 Putin decided to begin the so-called special military operation, he had two dreams. One, to reconstruct the USSR, the collapse of which he described as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. And the second one, to demonstrate to the rest of the world, specifically to the European Union, to the United States, that Russia is still a superpower. He failed with both. And when looking at these weaknesses exposed in 2025 alone, it's pretty obvious that Russia is the weakest, the poorest ever, and definitely not a superpower. And when I decided to collect these greatest problems that were revealed inside Russia in 2025, I have come across an article in the Chinese newspaper that is quite popular. And there they openly discussed what may happen with some of the Russian territories after the dissolution of the Russian Federation. We are not saying this is a good or a bad scenario, but this clearly demonstrates China does not treat Russia as an equal. China knows that Russia can only sustain this war because of their financial and military support. And our task, people who care for freedom, for human rights, to remain united in 2026 and to keep defeating the evil. So let's discuss what are the main weaknesses that were revealed and prove 100%, maybe 1,000,000%, that Russia is no more a superpower. First of all, that is their economy. Second, that is their inability to reach military goals that they set back in 2014. And of course, more and more protests that appear in very different parts of the Russian Federation and are caused by Putin's economic mismanagement, Russia's diplomatic isolation, and also the fact that this special military operation is losing support inside Russia. No, not because they've learned about the war crimes committed in Ukraine, but actually because the Kremlin does not have enough money to pay to the Russian war criminals and veterans, and they lose this support inside the Russian Federation. If you want to know more, to understand more about this part of the world, subscribe to my channel. My name is Anna, I'm from Ukraine, and we discuss some very difficult, very complex topics, and I'm always happy to be your translator, your guide in the Ukrainian history, in the Ukrainian realities, and in the Russian darkness. So, first of all, perhaps the greatest change in 2025 is a number of protests that started appearing in very different parts of the Russian Federation, beginning actually from the Far East, which China considers as a potential addition to their territories after the collapse of the Russian Federation. An important highlight, they did not discuss it back in 2022. So perhaps they witness Russia's inability to perform well, to satisfy Putin's demands, and they have a plan B too. They support this war because either way it's good for China, Europe has problems, the United States, Russia, and they are observing. But anyway, protests started appearing as a reaction to serious economic problems. At the beginning of 2022, we in Ukraine did hope that some Russians will go out on protest saying that it's awful, that the war must stop, that they do not support Putin. But it all was, like illusions. They were all in. And only when dozens of the Russian regions turned into a war zone, when we seriously destroyed their energy infrastructure, their oil refining, gas refining industry that are central for the Russian budget, they started going out on protest. And I've actually made a list of the most troublesome topics that push Russians on the streets. And first of all, this is taxation, the increase of VAT that begins in 2026 and touches a lot of Russian businesses, because not only they added 2% to VAT, But they also enlarged the number of businesses they have to pay it. Previously, it was like 60 million rubles, and now if your turnover is just 10 million, you have to pay 22%. This is deadly for the Russian businesses, and they are shouting about it on the streets, but perhaps no one will hear them because in 2026, Putin wants more money for the destruction of Ukraine that he literally burns during every night. Also, as the Kremlin needs more and more money, they started rising tariffs and various utility prices that people have to pay for this household services like water, gas, electricity. And in many regions, the debts are so big that Russian social services have to come, check, and push people to pay. But they don't have money because like 40% of Russians describe themselves as poor, and it's a size that constantly grows. Plus, we all know that they also go out on protests, especially in those regions that suffered greatly from the conscription. And these are poorer, distant regions. They are actually not poor, they are robbed by the Kremlin. And in many of such districts, in Siberia, in the far east of Russia, again, you see, it seems like a very problematic zone for Putin right now. They halved the payments they gave to the so-called SVO fighters because they don't have money for that. They don't have budgets to cover the expenses. And also a level of robbery against these people, like, because once again, everyone is poor around you, and they return back from war in Ukraine earning or looting something here. And then their counter citizens rob them. A number of crimes against the so-called veterans, in reality war criminals, is constantly rising because in this total poverty inside Russia, they are among the few who have at least some bloody money. But they have this payment, and this leads to more and more problems. And now we see that the youth is protesting against the restrictions, digital restrictions. There are lots of websites that are blocked. YouTube will be banned in Russia the next year. They cannot use WhatsApp, they cannot use Instagram, a lot of platforms. And now they push people to use Max, that is the Kremlin controlled social platform. And also they want to connect passport to your identity, like taking away anonymity of people. And young people are against that. Plus, mobile internet. I almost forgot about that. It's turned off in many, many regions. They claim it's the way to protect from the Ukrainian drones, but somehow drones keep targeting what we need. And Russians do not have connection, and they cannot share things they want. They cannot, I don't know, order a taxi or pay for something because mobile internet is not working in many regions for weeks, including St. Petersburg, Putin's favorite city where he began his career. So all of these protests are caused by serious military and economic mismanagement inside the Russian Federation that once again proves Russia is not a superpower. Do like this videos, comment, tell me please, when was the moment that you realized Russia is not a superpower? When was it? In times of the USSR, in the 90s, in 2000s, now after the failed Blitzkrieg, or maybe you still think they are strong? So, talking about economy, perhaps that is the most problematic zone right now because the front lines are not moving, only a number of the Russian regions that turn into a war zone is growing. But let's talk about this economy. First, Putin destroyed the National Wealth Fund that many Russian military vloggers jokingly name now this Russian Poverty Fund. It was something like an economic cushion that helped them have some money if they lack them in a specific sphere or in a specific regional budget, but now it is empty. It is so empty that the Russian federal budget lacks trillions of rubles, and perhaps this happens for the very first time. And that was the reason why they needed to introduce a higher VAT that led to the protests on the Russian streets. You see how everything is interconnected, and they do have an avalanche of problems. Now is not the time to appease Putin. Please, someone tell the White House. It's ruining all the strategy right now and all the security of Europe and the world. Now is the time to defeat Russia. And they openly talk about the banking crisis because, once again, millions of those Russians that experienced the default in 1998, that knew how they lost everything when the USSR collapsed, now started withdrawing their money from the Russian banks. And, for example, such big banks like Sberbank are panicking because these uncontrolled withdrawals lead to more problems inside the banking sector. And they had withdrawn like 1 trillion rubles from banks during this year. Approximately 4 billion rubles were withdrawn in this very first 3 weeks of December alone. So imagine the level of fear these people have that they take away their deposits. They know about these bad debts that lots of Russian businesses already have, that they are not able to return back to the banks. And that's the reason why they know it will be even worse after the VAT is increased. You see how everything is interconnected, and nobody's talking about that on, like CNN or CBS or Fox News. Everyone is talking that like Putin threatens the world with Oreshnik, but this Oreshnik is in such a bad condition that it literally explodes on the Russian territory. It doesn't fly. 3 generals were neutralized by the Ukrainian or resilience movements in Moscow, and many more by Putin himself because he was so dissatisfied with constant failures. So banking crisis and stagflation that is real, high interest rates that ruin big businesses, and big businesses are now talking about that. They were afraid for like 3 years of the full-scale invasion, but now they literally have nothing to lose. And Russia is not able to move on the front lines. That's the reality. The reason why they spend billions of dollars on bombing Kyiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, my native city Lutsk. Sometimes it's farther to the west, but it's the reality of my life too. Why? Because they cannot achieve anything on the front lines. They are not moving. They want to terrorize us, hoping that we will surrender. But no, we know what happens on the temporarily occupied territories. We know how they erase everything, and that the plan of Putin is to destroy Ukraine, our nation, our culture, our language. What we also know, and it's way more optimistic, is Russia is the weakest and the poorest ever. So now, once again, is not the time to appease this pathetic Kremlin dictator that rules Russia and destroys Russia for 25 years. How many more do you think he has? How can we give future to the people like Putin and Trump? How can we give them a right to, construct the future for our or next generations? That is like absurd. And Russians, apolitical Russians that supported this invasion now understand more about their own problems than some journalists talking about that in London or Washington. And this makes me angry. I'm sorry that I'm so emotional. Because dozens of the Russian regions are turned into a war zone. Major Russian cities constantly experience explosions on legitimate military facilities in different parts of Russia, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. They have cancelled flights, air raid alerts. They know they cannot protect it. They know they worked hard to protect oil refineries, gas pipelines, but they constantly fail. And they failed their oil industry. Lukoil cancel, Tatneft cancel, Rosneft cancel, Gazprom, and this was like the basis, like those elephants on which the Ruski Mir, Russian world stood. People, now is the time to finish this evil because Russia stands behind so many problems in this world, including in the United States, in South America, in Africa, in Europe. They finance a lot of mercenaries. They influence a lot of political and social campaigns. They cause a lot of troubles and support a lot of terrorist regimes. You know that, so please keep talking about that. Keep sharing these videos. Keep reminding your politicians that sometimes are too weak or love Russian money too much. Just I wonder why they do not accept bribes in Russian rubles. Perhaps they know the truth about Russia. So they have now a huge crisis of energy. They have closed markets. They've lost markets in Europe, and actually, they have to continue discounts and discounts on their oil. Now it is sold for like $35 per barrel because nobody wants to buy it. Everyone fears the consequences. And Putin fears one big thing that becomes more and more real with each day. That is the new mobilization, open general conscription. He tried that at the beginning of the special military operation when he realized that the blitzkrieg failed and he needed more people, and the reaction inside Russia was deadly for him. People started leaving the country. He lost like millions of perhaps most successful Russians who were working in IT, had some businesses, they relocated to Georgia, Turkey, the United States. And he knows if he begins something like that again, and he needs, because he doesn't have money to pay new war criminals to join his army. So right now he has this dilemma, and don't let weak, ignorant politicians or businessmen save this greatest war criminal of the 21st century. I know you know the truth. Please help to spread it. Share these videos. Subscribe to my other social media platforms. You will find the links in the description of this video. Same as the link to my main channel, Anna from Ukraine, where I provide daily updates about the situation here in Ukraine, because once again, so many people allow themselves to reason or advise something knowing literally nothing about us. Not being able to locate Ukraine on a map, or to, like see the difference between the state of Russia in 2022 and now in 2025, when even China that supported Russia plans how it will take some of the territories after the collapse of the failed Russian Federation that is no more a superpower and actually never was. Thank you for buying me coffees, becoming my patrons and sponsors of the channels. Do check our merch shop with lots of beautiful products that can help you remind the world about our fight and the need to defeat Russia, because they wonderfully work as reminders and conversation starters about Ukraine. But most importantly, have this happy holiday season, and remember that justice is important, that truth is important, and that by appeasing the evil, we only let it grow. But you have Ukraine, and Ukraine is ready to do the job. Russia is the weakest and the poorest ever. Just let's remain united. Slava Ukraini!